Hello everyone, and let's talk about the real reasons that leaders disregard data in return to office decisions. Now, return to office decisions is something that many leaders are calling for, whether it's leadership at Boeing, leadership at Amazon, wants a full-time return to office or increased time return to office, but often full-time return to office when we see what they're really going for. And the leaders claim that in-office work, boosts productivity and profits alike. But when we look at expert findings, when we look at the research, when we look at the data, that's showing that such claims are unfounded. In fact, Amazon leadership itself acknowledged that they don't find any specific data backing up the return to office claims. Is just something that the leadership prefers. So the evidence shows that having flexibility is what enhances both productivity and profits. And employee engagement, we know, rises with more workplace flexibility. So we have a study from Pittsburgh by Professor Mark Ma and graduate student Yu Ding, who found new insights on these topics. And their research counters the typical return to office justification decisions. So let's talk about the broader data first before diving into the specific new study from the University of Pittsburgh. Many leaders believe, and claim at least, that RTO, return to office, boosts firm value and productivity, but the study from Dr. Mark Ma and Yu Ding finds that it's the desire for control that drives return to office decisions. Leaders use return to office to scapegoat poor performance by the company themselves. The financial gains in terms of the stock market typically don't follow return to office, and employee satisfaction drops. So it's a bad deal all around. So let's talk about the broader data. Now, Hubstaff research finds that remote work cuts 62 hours of distraction per year. 62 hours of distraction. We know that distraction is a major driver of poor performance in the office. 74% of workers report higher productivity remotely, and 75% of leaders find that remote work leaves workers more focused. Let's talk about another source of data from Equiant, which finds that 66% of remote teams outperform teams that are on-site, and McKinsey research finds that top talent especially excels in more flexible setups. Research by IWG finds that 89% of CEOs report savings with hybrid work models compared to in-office models. And the remote workforce fosters both innovation and diversity. And senior leaders acknowledge the efficiency of remote work. And we know that RTO mandates and flexible ones have a lot of negative impacts. McLean and Company critiques these rigid RTO approaches. They find that it leads to increased turnover, disengagement, and reduces productivity. WorkReduce, another company, finds that RTO is linked to worse hiring and drops in morale. Unispace finds that firms that announce RTO have 42% higher attrition than they anticipated. So they anticipated some attrition when they announced RTO, but they had higher attrition than they anticipated. And the Scoop Flex Index finds that more flexible firms outperform in revenue. So let's talk about Dr. Mark Ma's study. It examines S&P firms that had RTO mandates, and it explores the rationale of RTO. What is the rationale and what is the reality? So the study evaluates CEO stock ownership and links it to company RTO decisions. If CEOs truly believed that RTO, return to office, improved company value, then the more stock CEOs owned, that should result in more likelihood of return to office, right? That makes sense if the CEOs truly believe that RTO improves company value. It's in their own interest to have RTO. But the study finds that there is no link, no significant correlation of CEO stock ownership with return to office. So the CEOs basically aren't putting their mouth where their money is. If they are more likely to own stock, that doesn't mean that they're more likely to announce an RTO. So RTO, therefore, is not primarily driven by CEO perceptions of financial gains from RTO. Their return to office is motivated by something else. Let's talk about what. What they do find is a diversionary tactic. So RTO does function to shift blame for poor firm performance to remote work from other factors that actually led to poor firm performance. For example, what the researchers find is that weak stock performance by a firm is likely to lead to announcement of return to office. So firms basically blame stock performance that's weak on lack of in-office work. So it acts as a justification for company performance problems. And so that's a blame game for RTO. And we see that also through stock ownership. For example, firms with more savvy institutional investors, so more stocks held not by small retail mom and pop shops, mom and pop individual retail investors, people like you and I, but by large institutional investors like pension funds, they are less likely to implement return to office because these institutional investors are more likely to see through the blame game and look at the actual factors causing poor firm performance, which is definitely not people working remotely. So RTO is used to mask managerial shortcomings in situations where institutional investors own less stock. What about power dynamics? How does that explain and impact RTO? What we see from the study is that return to office reflects cravings for control. Power-seeking male CEOs are more likely to enforce return to office policies. For example, how do you evaluate that someone is power hungry? Well, what they do is a very smart method of looking at how much CEOs are paid. And what they find is that CEOs who are paid much higher than the next highest paid executive, so let's say the next highest paid executive is the chief operating officer or the chief financial officer. And if the CEO is much higher paid, then they're more likely to order a return to office. And that much higher payment is an indication of power seeking and authoritarianness. So that shows that RTO is about power dynamics, office-based control mechanisms, rather than actually relating to performance. Now, let's talk about the impact of RTO on employees and shareholders. Employee satisfaction very clearly plummets following return to office, as seen from Glassdoor ratings of the company. And that's what Dr. Mark Ma used. But there's no observed financial gain from the stock market, from company income, and so on, from a mandate of return to office. So a return to office is bad for employees, and it's not good for shareholders in the short term. And if it's bad for employees and it harms their morale, that will undermine company performance in the long term, because unsatisfied employees in the long term will underperform, harming shareholder value. And here are a couple of cognitive biases to think about around return to office. Status quo bias is one of them. So cognitive biases are the dangerous judgment errors we make because of how our mind is wired. The status quo has to do with leaders seeking to maintain what they perceive as the status quo and not change the situation. So leaders resist remote work change despite clear evidence. And so this office routine blinds leaders to the benefits of remote work, and comfort with past practices causes them to not have aligned policies that are aligned with company performance, with employee engagement, and that in the long run will harm the company. So the benefits of hybrid and remote work are overlooked, and this resistance to change hinders embrace of new work models. Another problem here is the confirmation bias, the tendency to look for information that confirms your beliefs. So leaders tend to look for selective data. There was a really interesting press conference recently where the leader of Amazon AWS, Amazon Web Services, said that 9 out of 10 employees who I talk to want a full-time return to office. Which employees did you talk to, right? You probably talked to your stooges who just agreed with you, and other people you did not talk to. So that's a really pretty BS kind of statement. And that's an example of leaders looking for information that matches their beliefs rather than looking for the facts. So don't use selective data. Look for data that is actually clear. Look for broad surveys. Look for evaluation of external evidence of what similar companies are doing. So effective remote work evidence is frequently ignored, and personal biases shape poor leadership decision-making, so that objective analysis is sacrificed for biased views. So leadership motivations. We've found that Dr. Mark Ma's research probes deep into RTO decisions and reveals the true motivations behind RTO policies. The leadership control is a key aspect of the policy, and so is blame dynamics for poor financial performance by the leadership, and the leadership blames the remote work, which is not the actual cause of poor financial performance. So the financial benefit claims from RTO that leaders say, hey, return to office will lead to financial benefits, are not there. We don't see of the return to office having benefits from the study. And a study should really prompt a reevaluation of leadership methods. We should have more inclusive and adaptive leadership styles, and the study challenges traditional views of effectiveness of return to office. So we need to really reconsider the policy impacts of the return to office. And that's what you want to think about reversing the harmful trends from return to office. We need to combat power-hungry CEOs who drive return to office mandates. We need ethical leadership to counteract these tendencies. The investors should be challenging detrimental RTO policies and align hybrid work and remote work policies with actual employee needs and what will actually result in the best company bottom line performance. Let's advocate for employee-centric flexible work models, which is what's correlated with performance, productivity, high engagement, and therefore good shareholder returns, and have a good ethical approach to return to office decisions and hybrid work decisions. So we need to have not rigid, but flexible work policies. All right, everyone. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Wise Decision Maker Show. My name is Dr. Gleb Tsipursky, and I'm the CEO of Disaster Avoidance Experts, the future work consultancy that sponsors the Wise Decision Maker Show. And I hope that you will make sure to subscribe to the show wherever you checked us out and leave a review. It helps other people discover the show and helps us improve the show.